Alright, we're going to be summing up the usability tests for today. First of all, we're going to start with who did the best. And that one was the Trump store. They scored kind of mediocre for usefulness. Do I want to use the site? Wasn't like, no, I don't want to pay $100 some for a t-shirt. Did I enjoy using it? It was meh. The wording, it did have a few words that I didn't really grasp. Like this, you're talking to a non-commissioned officer, just stuff you wouldn't really understand. Does the website use conventions? The site ID it was there, it just wasn't in the right spot. Didn't have a search option. It scored bad without tabs. Global navigation had some elements of the 4 elements they're looking for, and the global navigation was exactly what it was supposed to look like on fillable forms, and there wasn't any happy talk at all. It was all business. Passed the trunk test. I performed on it pretty well. And the first casualty of war is the home page answer all these questions. It did. And does the narrator narrate? It did. Mobile compatibility, it was all there, so they scored 89%. Now the next highest scoring one was Sports Illustrated. They scored pretty good for usability attributes section of this. It's a website dedicated to sports news. It was easy to figure out. This was more my preference here. Do you want to use this site? Wasn't really anything a normal person I think would count off. Did I enjoy using the site? Too, probably just because I'm not really into sports, and it was kind of wasn't really meant for a guy like me. Are things self-evident or self-explanatory? His wording was complete gibberish to a guy who didn't understand so much sports, and the hyperlinks were just junk. The buttons were somewhere in between, just crazy looking, and they obviously look like buttons. They were crazy with acronyms. Acronyms were freaking everywhere. Everything was really conventional. Couldn't tell. I could tell where I was by looking at the sections, but it was pretty crazy. They didn't have tabs. They did have sections, so they scored a little bit lousy with tabs. Local navigation, they sort of had one, I thought, so they scored like mediocre there. They had a great foot navigator. Persistent navigation, they were pretty persistent with their navigation. Their global navigation was on every page, and the global navigation had a site ID, utilities, search box, and sections. It had all that. And pages were broken up into clearly defined areas, but they did not avoid flawed hierarchies. I felt just NBA, you got this stuff. It looks like it's saying the NBA crossover, Olympic scores, NCAAF schedule, fantasy standings, MLB stats. This setup here was what just sunk it for them. They did have page names everywhere. Page names weren't very prominent because they were over there on the left-hand side. Like it was supposed to be part of their navigation. They did not use breadcrumbs, and that really hurt them some more. And the text was really formatted to use scanning amongst all the normal things, headings. And I tried looking up Colorado Avalanche scores because I'm from Colorado, and yep. And I didn't have a problem. Found it right away. Website didn't provide me with a whole lot of guidance, but I could kind of figure it out by what they did. Happy talk. They didn't have a whole lot of happy talk, right down to business with them. Trunk test. It scored lousily on the "you are here" indicators and the page name. So these guys actually ended up scoring an 87. The next website is going to be SoftMaker. They provide alternatives to Microsoft Office. They got usefulness. It was, I could think of a few people who need this. Memorable. It's pretty memorable. It wasn't hard to figure out. did what it was supposed to do, could do what I set out to do, but I struggled at times with things self-evident or self-explanatory. A lot of them really were. They had good wordings, nice hyperlinks, the buttons were good, looked like buttons. Where did I find the local navigation? Didn't. That's why they got a 1. Persistent navigation, they scored a mostly, because there was, with them, their problem was, you go to shop and you can see that it's not in fillable forms, but they already started to reduce the global navigation down. Scored them rather low, and I could tell where I was all the time, no matter where I was in the site. Global navigation was mostly there, and it had mostly had all the things it needed except for the search box, and global, it looked just like it was supposed to once I got to the fillable forms. It's just they pulled the gun a little bit too soon on it. Pages were broken up in clearly defined areas. It avoided hierarchies. Every page had an identifiable page name. Breadcrumbs were not present. That's why they scored low there. And I tried to download a manual from PlanMaker. For PlanMaker, this didn't have to think about what I was doing. I wish it had provided me with a little bit more guidance, because the first time I went through here I was just looking for a help function for PlanMaker, and I had to search this whole thing until I finally looked at downloads, and user manuals is under downloads. So that could be just a little bit confusing. Avoided happy talk. The trunk test did flunked the sections, local navigation, and search bar part. And the home page, it answered the questions, kinda. It answered them fairly well, not all perfect. How to get the message across. 3 important places on the page where we expect to see what it is about. Did terrible. No tagline, no welcome blurb, no learn more video. And this thing isn't a household name or anything. Nobody knows what SoftMaker's about. That's the thing that killed him, was just not being a household name, not having any of the normal things you'd find in a website like that. Narrator worked great. Mobile compatibility worked great, and they had a grand total of 81. The grand loser is the Universal Church Triumphant of Apathetic Agnostic. Here you can see the global navigation looks like kind of somebody threw up all over it, and it's really just a really bland website from 1995 that people just stopped updating a while back. They scored like a 2 out of 3 on usefulness. It was learnable, memorable, about as memorable as Super Mario Brothers is. It was easy to figure out, and would I want to use it? Maybe once in a while, just to see some of the poems and stuff they got on there. Do you think other people want to use this site? I'm sure somebody who's agnostic wants to be actually part of a church probably would go do this. Did I enjoy using it? It was alright. Things self-evident or self-explanatory. The wording was good. They had excellent hyperlinks, and the buttons definitely looked like buttons. And how would you view the acronyms? Acronyms, they had none, so it was pretty good. Definitely used conventions, with the exception of I couldn't tell where I was by looking at the sections at all, because it was just like a 1995 tech right there. It just didn't work out. And they didn't use tabs, which really hurt them in a lot of it. And their local navigation was right where it was supposed to be. And I found the footer. It was right where it was supposed to be. Persistent navigation was meh. It was okay. Form they have you fill out. The fillable forms didn't have the global navigation on it, so they lost some points there. Pages were not really broken up into clearly defined areas. At least I didn't feel they were. Because if you look at it, it's kind of like it just goes into random stuff, like current updates. There's a bunch of dates and stuff, and then it just jumps into whatever this is. It doesn't explain what this is. I only have 2 options really for the flawed hierarchies, but I put a 2 because it was pretty crazy looking. At times the site ID just disappeared and was replaced by a glorified page name, but they definitely had page names on every page. It's just, it was kind of lousy the way they did it. They didn't have breadcrumbs at all. It somewhat supports scannings. Lots of headings and paragraphs, and they used bulleted lists. This is actually probably the only website I saw today that used highlighted key terms and used a bulleted list, because it was the only one that needed to. They weren't trying to sell me anything. Sort of headings, but it wasn't really broken down all that right. And my mission was to view the contents of the last sermon. I failed miserably. I couldn't find anything about that, just about the list of poems and stuff. So I imagine that is what somebody who's visiting the website would want to see, is just some stuff about their last sermon, and they just didn't have the stuff there. Did your website provide any information about it? It did, but it wasn't a lot. The trunk test, it pretty much nailed the trunk test. It did great. You are here indicators, not so much though. And the first casualty award is a homepage to answer a bunch of these questions. It did mostly, but it tripped up on what do they have here and what can I do here. How do I get the message across? There are 3 important places. It didn't have a learn more video. That's where it sunk in that category. Attributes for a good tagline. Had really good tagline. Fit Krug's description of it totally. We don't know and we don't care. The narrator worked. Mobile compatibility was garbage. So it ended up getting the lowest score, which was a 78.